Thank you and good afternoon. I'm delighted to meet all of you. I've spent 2 days with you, and I'm flattered and honored that Samir and Vinod have invited me to present to you tonight. And our gracious host, Vinod, has said some wonderful things last night at the dinner. It was most touching to hear his answer to the last question about the impact of his family on passion and his feelings and fact. But Pierre Vinod actually said something very, very wise and sage about presentations. He said, what is said is less important than what is heard. And if you think about it, presentations are all about what we say and what we tell our investors, our customers, our partners. But are they hearing us? And the essence of communication, of presentation, is that there is someone listening, and not only listening, but reacting to your presentation, to your pitch, to your communication. The name of our company is Power Presentations, and our goal is always to make a power presentation. And it's always important to be focused on a specific presentation. I've had the privilege of working with Stion, with Chet Ferris, and helping him with his presentation, and with successful result. I've had the privilege of working with Vlad Shmunis and his team and the Ring Central presentation, and I look forward to working with other of the companies. But one of the companies that really interested me in these 2 days of the presentation at the CEO Summit is Group Me. And I know that they're the buzz of the South by Southwest Conference, and I know that they're buzz of New York City, and they're the buzz of TechCrunch, and they're the buzz of this conference. And I know that they've just raised $10.6 million from Coastal Ventures, but pretty soon they're going to go through that $10.6 million and have to raise another round. So I'm just going to hypothetically flash forward for Group Me to their next round, and just say that their C round, their target C round, somewhere around September 15th, 2011, in Menlo Park at one of the venture firms. And that in consideration of the crowd of people who are seeking financing, that they limit their presentation to about 20 minutes. That the presentation starts at 9 a.m. and ends at 9:20 a.m. And as I describe this hypothetical situation with Group Me, I'm going to ask everybody in this room to do a double track in his or her mind, to think of a presentation that you might be giving in the near future, whether to a customer, to a partner for financing, to a public offering, even the Coastal partners who are giving presentations to their limited partners. And as I describe this, think about how important it is to deliver the power presentation. The elements in a presentation consist of the presenter, and in business today, presenters are accompanied by their graphics. People prepare their deck. Well, I'm going to ask everybody, or urge everybody in this room, from this moment on, to rotate the focus away from the deck and to the presenter. Why? Because the Group Me guys can't stay in the Hamptons for an extra few days beyond Labor Day and send the deck to Menlo Park and hope to get a deal. Just as a public offering can't sit in their home offices and expect investors to buy a 10% tranche of their offering based on their deck, their slides. Even since the advent of retailroadshow.com, where the offering companies for public offerings record their presentation to the investment banker's sales force and post it on the web, where anybody with a browser can click on, hit the disclaimer, and see the entire presentation and get the slideshow along with the narrative and the video of the CEO and the CFO presenting. They still have to go out and do their 2-week roadshow. Why? Because no investor will make a 10% purchase based on a canned deck. It's all about management. It's all about people. It's all about engagement with people. Yesterday's kickoff by Eric Schmidt had that as number one. When he talked about what would be a successful business, he said it's all about people, making people feel connected. And that's what presentations are all about. So the focus is on the presenter, relegating PowerPoint downward to the role of presenter support. So the primary focus is on the story and not the slides. However, if we look at this as our challenge, we're looking at as a one-way street, an outbound radio-style transmission. What, of course, we want is the return loop on that transmission. In the business of Silicon Valley, that loop is called a network. In the business of presentations, it goes by a different name, the fine art of Aristotle. The fine art of moving audiences from point A to point B. Now, as I describe this hypothetical situation for Group Me, please do the double track in your mind for your own presentation. Every audience enters every room at point A in one of 3 states: unknowing, dubious, or resistant. Yes, right? Unknowing. Why are we here? I don't know. My boss couldn't make it, so she asked me to cover for her. Dubious. I don't know. This private social web mobile stuff is a really crowded field. I mean, and Beluga was acquired by Facebook. I mean, talk about juice. Talk about clout. And Group Me's going up after them? I don't think so. State 3 is resistant. No way. This field is up for grabs. It's a horse race. It's Keystone Cops. No one's coming to the lead. I'm going to listen to the presentation by the Group Me folks and blow them away. I'll wait until the field settles down and the winners emerge. So point A in every presentation can either be unknowing, dubious, or resistant. Point B, Jared, how much more do you need? So point B, therefore, is what Jared and Steve want. Point B is the call to action. In order for your audience to respond to your call to action, they need a reason, and the reason has to be theirs and not yours. That's called audience advocacy, in which you, the presenter, before you step into a room, you think about that audience. You think about what they know, what they need to know, what their fears, concerns, hot buttons are. Do they have an investment in the competitor? Do they buy up a sector? How much do they know and how much do they need to know in order to act on your point B, your call to action? The interesting precedent for audience advocacy comes in the classic relationship of the salesperson and the customer. What do most salespersons sell? Those. What do sales managers urge them to sell instead? Those. An interesting precedent for audience advocacy comes in the field of publishing. This book by Bill Davidow about his early successes at Intel with Operation Crush has been a Bible in this valley for years, years and years and years. Bill wrote a second book following this book, and he called it Total Customer Service, in which Bill marked a shift in his Bill said it marked a shift in his thinking from selling the product to selling the customer. My background before I started in Silicon Valley was in the television industry as a producer for public affairs and news programs for WCBS TV in New York. When I left New York and came to Silicon Valley, I stopped working on behalf of the presenter and worked on behalf of the audience. And if I leave you with nothing else today, make it work for your audience. If you don't make it work for your audience, if they don't hear what you say, it's a wasted effort. So Vinod's words ring true. What is said is less important than what is heard. The audience must hear you and value what you tell them. And audience advocacy begins with the story. So now let's turn the floor around. Let's flip the lens. I've been asking you all to think about your own presentation. I'm going to ask you to engage in a brief exercise with me, and we'll need the microphones from this because we'll look for audience participation. Thank you. I'm going to ask you all, or anybody in the audience, to think of a time you were in the audience and you listened to a story, and the story you listened to did not work. Tell me what went wrong with the story. Diagnose the problem. Yes, sir. Here's a gentleman with a blue shirt.
Yeah, the story didn't connect the dots.
Didn't connect the dots. Okay, thank you. Someone else? This gentleman here.
The conclusion wasn't logical from the description of the story.
The conclusion, so the conclusion, not logical. And I'll bet I know what went through your mind at the end of that presentation when there was no conclusion. I'll bet you thought this to yourself. And for those of you who can't read, what's the point? Or as impatient teenagers put it, and your point is? Okay, someone else, please. This gentleman right down here. Oh, Pierre.
Actually, my question is similar to what you just said, but can't explain the business in 2 declarative sentences or less.
So, can't be succinct, right, Pierre? Thank you, Pierre.
An issue of relevance, or it being irrelevant, or in other words, what's in it for me? You missed it.
Irrelevant for audience. Gentleman with the tan.
The presenter's so uncomfortable that you never even hear the story.
What's your name, please?
Jim.
Jean?
Jim.
Jim. Jim, that is a problem when the presenter is uncomfortable and you sense their discomfort, but that's not a story factor. So please, and I grant you, that could sabotage your presentation. Please think of a story factor, Jim.
Just they set up expectations and then never answer them at the end of the presentation.
Well, so unfulfilled expectations. And Jim, I'll bet it's the same carry away for you. What's the point? Okay, someone else. Anne-Marie.
Solving a problem I may not care about.
I'm sorry?
Solving a problem I may not care about.
Solving a problem I may not care about. Okay? The gentleman here.
The first 30 seconds.
I didn't hear you.
The first 30 seconds of the story failed to grab my attention.
Okay. First 30 seconds failed to grab attention. How many of you are in technology? Anne-Marie, what happens in technology?
You tell them how to build the watch.
How to build a watch. When all they need is the time, right? Or Anne-Marie, how about how to build a clock factory that makes the watch so they could read the time, right? Back in the back there.
So sometimes people just say, that sounds too good to be true. I don't believe you.
Too good to be true. And you know the end of that statement, don't you? It is. If it's too good to be true, it is not true. Don't feel involved. Okay, we have, as you can see, we're getting some variations on the theme. There's one that nobody's mentioned yet, and it comes in response to the question, how often in your entire professional career have you sat through an entire presentation at the end of which you said to yourself, gee, I wish they'd go on for longer? Not very long. Okay. Too long. So what we have here with all these sentences is known as the 5 cardinal sins of storytelling. And the best way to explain that is to say, let's say, is Fred here? Fred? Fred Cannon? Not here? He went back, okay. Who's from out of town? Anne-Marie, you're from Michigan, right? Suppose I were to give Anne-Marie a presentation about what I had for dinner on Sunday night. So Anne-Marie smiles, but you know what my point is, don't you, Anne-Marie? I'm going to tell you what I had for dinner on Sunday night. So now I'm setting up the expectation and I'm giving you a conclusion. But why does Anne-Marie care what I had for dinner Sunday night unless she were to say to me, well, Jerry, I'm from Michigan and I'm not familiar with the Bay Area. Can you recommend a place where you've been to dinner recently where I might have a decent meal? Well, let me tell you what I had for dinner Sunday night. And now there's a relevance to your audience and it's solving a problem you care about and you do feel involved because it's all about you. So we get rid of this cardinal sin. If in telling Anne-Marie what I had for dinner, I used the phylum, genus, and species name of every course in the dinner, I'd be giving you how to build a clock. If instead I just use adjectives and nouns, I'd get rid of this cardinal sin. If in telling Anne-Marie what I had for dinner, I'd take 5 hours to describe what took 2 hours to eat, I'd be too long. If I did it in 5 minutes, I'd get rid of that cardinal sin. And finally, if I tell Anne-Marie what I had for dinner by starting with the dessert, going back to the main course, forward to the cheese course, and back to the salad course, I wouldn't be connecting the dots. If instead I went from soup to nuts, I'd get rid of that cardinal sin. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cardinal sins. Now, this can't be succinct, Pierre, you're absolutely right, as a variation of too long. But there are 2 I haven't mentioned yet, 2 I haven't indicated, and we'll indicate these by asterisks here. The first 30-second failed to grab the attention, absolutely. You have to get the audience's attention. The good news is, in a short while, I'm going to show you how to grab the audience's attention in any presentation, and I'm going to show it to you and offer 3 of you to come up here and allow me to coach you in that for your business, for your presentation. So start thinking about whether you'd like to take a shot at capturing the audience's attention immediately. And that is a problem, but I would probably place it down around 6 or 7, maybe not in the top 5, because the top 5 are very, very common. The one I haven't mentioned is the too good to be true. Implied in the too good to be true is that the presenter is giving material that lacks credibility. Well, that's not a story factor. That's an accountability factor. Aristotle couldn't help you. Cicero couldn't help you. No one could help you with that if you would dare to stand up in front of an audience and use material lacking in credibility. But we can help you with the other 5. As a matter of fact, we ask this question of everybody who takes the program. Chet, you'll remember that, right? That's how we began the day. And Vlad, you remember that too. We began right away with the 5 cardinal sins. You have 2 examples here of people who heard me ask those questions, and their teams said the same thing as you're all saying. They're so universal that we've actually programmed them in here. No clear point. No benefit to the audience. Too detailed, too long, and no clear flow. So we'll give you solutions for each of these. Very brief, succinct solutions for each of these factors. The solution to no clear point, to no call to action, is point B. Ask for the order. Salesmanship, saleswomanship 101. Ask for the order. Faint heart never won fair lady. Don't assume the audience will give you what they want, what you want, if you don't ask for it. Ask for the order. State point B. The no benefit is really a very recurrent problem, and it's the root of Vinod's quote. It has to be heard by the audience. So let me give you an example. Several years ago, I coached a gentleman for his IPO roadshow. His company manufactured and designed custom integrated circuits. And he took the full program with us. And during the program, I role-played a potential investor. At the end of the program, he stood up at the end of the room, at the front of the room rather, and presented to me, and I role-played a potential investor from Fidelity. He went through his presentation, and when he got to the product part of his presentation, he reached down to the table and held up a thick catalog. He looked at me and he said, "This is our product catalog. No one else in the industry has as many custom circuits in their catalog as we do in ours." And I stopped and said, "So what?" So he thought for a second. He held up the catalog, he looked at me again, and he said, "With this depth of product, we protect our revenue stream against cyclical variations." That's the right benefit for the right audience. Because so many presenters forget that, we've developed a trigger that will cause it among you, that will cause it in any presentation. And it's based on the acronym WIIFM. One gentleman said, "What's in it for me?" There's no what's in it for me. Well, suppose you rotate the focus to you. Make that last letter Y. What's in it for you? So here's what you can do immediately going back to your own organizations. You can use the timeout signal. Be buddy-buddy with everybody in your company. Or before you deliver a presentation, ask somebody in your company to join you. And as you run through your presentation, do the timeout signal. The presenter at that point would be required to stop forward progress on the presentation and to start and finish this sentence with a whiffy. Or to, another timeout, pose this rhetorical question and answer it with a whiffy. Or this rhetorical question, this rhetorical question, this rhetorical question, and that rhetorical question. I see some of you are taking notes. In a couple of weeks, you're all going to get a copy of a book that's coming out, and my latest book is coming out. It'll be downloadable in a couple of weeks. It's just coming to market right now, and there's a chapter in which this is listed in detail. The whiffy, the whiffy, the whiffy. If you walk away with nothing else, it's where I started with Vinod. It's where I send you right now. Make it good for the audience, and they'll make it good for you. Make it meaningless to the audience, they'll make it meaningless to you. The too detailed. Very simple little rule of thumb. We're all beset by acronyms. We're all beset by buzzwords. We talk to one another as if everybody knows these acronyms and buzzwords. They don't all. So a very simple rule of thumb is, if you assume that one person in the audience does not understand one of your technical terms, buzzwords, or acronyms, stop your forward progress and explain it. The too long, There's a rule of thumb that's been around for years in the design field. The great architect Mies van der Rohe, who designed the Seagram building, coined it. Less is more. Well, the same is true for presentations. No one wants to hear the entire history of Western civilization from you. In this Twitter-driven age of 140 characters and short emails without sentences, without full, complete sentence structures, attention spans are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And the great novelist William Faulkner once made the statement that writers fall in love with their words as if they're children. He said, well, you have to get rid of the little darlings. Don't fall in love with your business so that you have to tell, as Anne-Marie says, how to build a clock factory that will build a watch that will tell you the time. However long you think it is, make it shorter. The audience does not have the patience or the time or the interest or the capability of understanding your business to the degree that you have. There have been some very impressive presenters here, particularly the scientists, that I, as a non-scientist, have set in awe of. I wish I could understand your technology as well as you do, but if I were to be a surrogate for the investor, if I were to be an audience advocate for the investor, I can't understand your technology to that degree unless you explain it to me. And finally, the no clear flow. The first gentleman who talked about not connecting the dots. This is a serious, serious problem because as a presenter, you understand your material. And as you stand there and deliver it, you know how one piece feeds to the other. But if the audience sits there and says, now wait a minute, how did he get, I didn't follow how did they get there from here? And as soon as the audience says, how did they get there from here, they stop listening. When they stop listening, your potential for having your point be acted upon favorably is diminished. And let's even extend the problem even further. Suppose the audience, after saying, how did they get there from here, starts thinking and then tunes in again and says, oh yeah, I see how they got there from here. And then they tune in again. But if you move forward in the presentation and they miss the whole section, they don't catch up. So it's important that whatever you decide, whether it's 15 or 20 minutes, the flow of that presentation is clear. And for that, what you need is a flow structure, a logical template that organizes all the components of your presentation. I was privileged to be the coach of the eBay Roadshow, and I'll share with you what Mrs. Whitman did with that roadshow. She stood up and said, I used to work at Bain & Company. And at Bain & Company, we had a 4-question template that we applied to any company to determine its viability. She listed the 4 questions that Bain & Company had. She mapped it to eBay. Just a simple little gathering of the facts of the eBay story into 4 unique themes that answered questions of other potential investors made it flow. One of the more common flow structures is problem solution. And if you think about it, what I've been telling you this morning is problem solution. This afternoon. These are the 5 cardinal sins, and each of those is the solution. And as we go forward in the rest of the afternoon, I'm going to list some problems in other fields of presentations, other areas of presentations, and show you how the solutions can offset those problems. But for the 5 cardinal sins of the story, this is what's essential. And particularly that flow structure, because you don't want your audience to say, how did he get there from here? What's next? How did that? What? You don't want them to lose track. You need to connect the dots for them. And this is not exactly a brand new concept. It's been around for 2,300 years. Aristotle said every story needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So the gentleman who talked about didn't capture my attention in 30 seconds, was that you, sir? What was your name? Philip. Philip is absolutely right. You need to get the audience's attention immediately. Why? That's why. So the way to get the audience attention is a device, a series of sentences called the opening gambit. There are 7 options for opening gambits. I'm going to give you the 7 options. As I deliver the 7 options, please go back to thinking about your own presentation and what you might say as an opening gambit. And when I'm done, I'll invite 3 people to come up here and we'll coach them in their opening gambit. And I hope you will take me up on my offer and allow me to coach you in the opening gambit. Number 1 is to ask the audience a question. I asked you a question at the beginning of my presentation about what goes wrong with stories, and Jim thought it was about perhaps the presenter's body language, his discomfort. But by asking the question, Jim, I got you back on track of the story. One of the most effective opening gambits I've ever seen was used by the second speaker yesterday morning, Scott Cook. And this goes all the way back to the early 90s when Intuit was still a private company. And Scott, as a private company CEO, stood up at an investment banking conference in San Francisco and said, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Intuit presentation. Let's begin today's session with a question. How many of you balance your checkbooks? May I see a show of hands? And almost everybody in the room put their hands up. Then he said, now how many of you like doing it? And almost everybody in the room put their hands down. And if you think about it, that's exactly what he did yesterday. How many of you took accounting in college? How many of you like taking accounting in college? It works for Scott. It works beautifully. Doesn't work for everybody. Beware of that direct question for 2 reasons. Number 1, audiences don't like to be polled with their hands as school children. Scott Cook can get away with it because he's the consummate presenter. But the other reason why not to use a direct question to the audience is that you may not get the show of hands you expect. Good afternoon. May I ask a question? How many of you balance your checkbooks? Only one man? Well, do you like doing it? He likes doing it. Now what do I do? So instead of asking a direct question, make your question a rhetorical question. Good afternoon. If I were to ask the group of you how many of you balance your checkbooks, the likelihood is most of you would say yes. No one's going to argue with that, but they're thinking of balancing checkbooks. Number 2, a factoid, a striking declarative statement or statistic. Stion just received $350 million from the Department of Energy for the development of photovoltaic cells. No other company has received that kind of grant in that area than Stion. Bam, right away. Oh my. Group Me was awarded the #1 hottest company at South by Southwest. Wow. Group Me has 100 million users per month. No other company can make that statement. So a declarative, striking statement of fact or numbers. A retrospective, prospective opening gambit, a then and now approach. From time to time, I'm invited to give a presentation like this about how to give a presentation, and sometimes I use a retrospective, prospective opening gambit. I say, good evening, thanks for having me here. Let me ask you all to flash back to the Fleet Arena in Boston on a warm summer night in 2004. A young, unknown Illinois state legislator stood up and began to speak to the Democratic National Convention. 16 and a half minutes later, he stepped on a path to the presidency, largely based on his presentation skills. So past, move it forward into the future. An anecdote. Now, by an anecdote, I do not mean a joke. For some strange reason, there's a pervasive belief in the presentation industry that a presenter should begin a presentation with a joke. Don't. No one can guarantee the success or failure of a joke. if you could guarantee it, you could replace Jay Leno. And Jay Leno is a professional performer, and he can't guarantee the success or failure of a joke. So what do we mean by an anecdote? By an anecdote, we mean a human interest story. Ronald Reagan, the great communicator, and deservedly so, never spoke for more than a few moments without talking about the brave young soldier or the dedicated students. Newspapers do this all the time. Today's New York Times, in a note of uncanny coincidence, has an article that says, the headline of which says, "Social networks offer a way to narrow the field of friends." All about GroupMe and its competitors. But the first sentence is, just ask Becca Ackroyd. When Miss Ackroyd, a 29-year-old lawyer in Sacramento, wanted to share a picture, we're right down to Becca Ackroyd. So about whom could GroupMe talk about? They could talk about another Becca Ackroyd. You heard Melissa Mayer yesterday talk about she used an anecdote as well about how she wanted to find a restaurant that her mother liked, that her husband liked. She put herself into the picture, especially for the 4-year-old niece of her sister. So use a common anecdote. We frequently have, coming to our services, seeking our services, a lot of life sciences companies, people who want to talk about their brilliant new drug or their brilliant new device that is going to save mankind. And they're ready to launch right into it, how to build a clock factory, Anne-Marie. And I do this, and I say, got a patient? Sure. So use an anecdote of a human interest story. A quotation. Now, by a quotation, I don't mean something that Winston Churchill said or John Kennedy said or even Tom Peters said, unless they said it about GroupMe or about Stions. So get an influencer that's in your field and say it about your company. It has to be a relevant quote. Please resist the temptation to go down to the bookstore, or if there are any left, to go to Amazon and buy a book called 10,000 Quotes for All Occasion. None of them is relevant. So get a relevant quote if you're going to use it. An aphorism is a familiar saying that everyone will recognize. An aphorism, we work with a company in the speech recognition business, and they used easier said than done. Another company in the graphics display business used a picture's worth 1,000 words. Another company with a long selling cycle uses the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So an aphorism is a familiar saying that anyone will recognize. And finally, the analogy. The analogy is a comparison of two dissimilar factors. I used an analogy with you just a few moments ago when I talked about Bill Davidow's books. I sure hope you were wondering what Bill Davidow's books have to do with presentation skills. But at the conclusion of the discussion of his books, what I said was, as he shifted the focus from selling the product to selling the customer, when I moved from TV to the business community, I shifted my focus from working on behalf of the presenter to working on behalf of the audience. So after getting your attention with something slightly offbeat, I linked to the point B of this afternoon, which is to get you to think about your audience, which is where I began today by Vinod's quote. So let's go back to Scott Cook, way back in the early 90s when he was launching Intuit. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Intuit presentation. Let me begin today's session with a question. How many of you balance your checkbooks? How many of you like balancing your checkbook? So that was the attention-getting step. He then linked forward by saying, you're not alone. Millions of people around the world hate balancing their checkbooks. Our company, Intuit, has developed a very simple, easy-to-use, and inexpensive personal finance tool that makes balancing checkbooks a cinch. We call that personal finance tool Quicken. That was his unique selling proposition. His succinct, Pierre, one-sentence definition of what he does. Pierre, otherwise known as the elevator pitch. And it's the elevator pitch in this building and not the Transamerica building. Right, Pierre? Pierre has suffered all these long, long-winded presentations about what we do, and at the end of which you probably don't know what they do. Then Scott linked forward again. He said, linking forward, we're confident that those millions of people who hate balancing their checkbooks will buy many units of Quicken. And then he said, making Intuit a company you want to watch, which happened to be his point B. His point B in appearing at that investment banking conference was not to raise capital as all the other private companies were there to do, because he didn't need any money. Vinod's prior firm, Kleiner, had lined his pockets very handsomely, right, Vinod? So his point B in appearing at the investment banking conference as a private company was to come out of stealth mode and to tee up the investment community for the forthcoming IPO. So let's repeat the 3 steps. Step 1, a double question. How many balance their checkbooks? How many like balancing their checkbooks? The link forward. You're not alone. Millions of people around the world also hate balancing their checkbooks. Our company has made a product that makes it easy. It's called Quicken. That's the unique selling proposition. Then the link forward from the unique selling proposition. We're confident that those millions of people who hate balancing their checkbooks will buy many units of Quicken. And then point B, making Intuit a company you want to watch. One more example before we open the floor to volunteers. And this is from the IPO trade. This is the Network Appliance IPO roadshow. Dan Warmanhoven, the CEO of that company, chose a triple opening gambit. He chose an analogy, an aphorism, and a question. So Dan said, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Network Appliance IPO roadshow. And then he said, what's in a name? I hope that sounds familiar because it's from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. It's an aphorism. It's a familiar saying. Then he posed a rhetorical question. He said, what's an appliance? Because next to him on the screen was a large logo that said Network Appliance, and technology investors who are rather specialized might have thought they'd gone into the wrong room. Then he answered his rhetorical question with an analogy. He said, a toaster is an appliance. A toaster does one thing and one thing well. It toasts bread. So that was the triple opening gambit. He then linked forward by saying, managing data on networks, it's complex. It's currently handled by appliances that do many things and none of them very well. You know what's coming next. Our company, Network Appliance, has developed a device that does one thing and one thing well. It's a dedicated device that manages data on networks, and we call that device a file server. So in one short sentence, he described his unique selling proposition, his elevator pitch. He then linked forward again by saying, we're confident when you consider the growing volume and complexity of data on networks that we're in a very large market. And then he said, we invite you to participate in that growth opportunity, which happened to be his point B. Notice he didn't say buy our stock. You don't say that to a person who buys stock for a living. Nor did he say invest in us. You don't say that to a person whose job title is institutional investor. He said, we invite you to participate in this growth opportunity. So let's go back and do the whole thing once again before I turn it over to you. The triple opening gambit. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Network Appliance IPO Roadshow. What's in a name? What's an appliance? A toaster is an appliance. A toaster does one thing and one thing well. It toasts bread. The link forward. Managing data on networks is complex. It's currently handled by appliances that do many things, none of them very well. Our company has developed one dedicated device called the file server that does nothing but manage data on networks. The link forward from the USP. When you consider the growing volume and complexity of data on networks, you can see that we're in a growth market, and we invite you to participate in that growth opportunity. Okay. Who wants to take a shot? Do we have 1, 2, 3 volunteers? 1 volunteer. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do it. You don't have to come up and do it cold. One. What's your name, sir? Zidium? Okay. And one other person? We have one more? 2, Jim? One more? One more, come on. Do we have a hand up here? Okay. We've got 4. So why don't we just take, don't go far. Let's take 2 or 3 minutes, kind of stand in your chair and sit and stretch. And we'll let the 4 participants do this. Think of your situation and audience. So is it an investment? Is it a customer? Is it a partner? Is it a conference? Is it a keynote? Board meeting? Pick one of the 7, or 2 of the 7, or 3 of the 7. Link forward through the unique selling proposition, and then link forward again into point B. So let's just take a 2-minute break, and we'll have the volunteers come up, and I hope you will all learn from the volunteers. Before we start the 2-minute break, I just will say this, that over the years I've discovered that one of the best ways of learning is watching somebody else do it. So the more volunteers we have, the more you'll share with your other compatriots here at the conference. So let's take a 2-minute break, and we'll come back. So I have an hour.
You have 50 minutes.
5:00.
50 is the magic number. That's how many people you have in the audience.
5:01. Thank you. Do I get that? Do I get a copy of that?
Yeah, they're going to be photographed. I'll be able to download.
Tell me your name again.
Xavier. Xavier.
Xavier. Okay. Mr. Matthewson. Another minute or so and we'll resume. Okay, let's go. Jim, would you like to be first? So the gentleman here has a microphone for you. If you come up to the stage. And come on up. And just tell us the situation and audience for your presentation.
Okay. Yeah, Jim O'Brien, Energy Dynamics. We developed hydraulic hybrid transmissions for vehicles.
Okay. And who are you presenting to?
I'm opening up an investor pitch.
Opening an investor pitch. And which of the 7 have you chosen on the screen?
Question.
Question. Okay, go for it.
How many people out there enjoy what they pay for fuel at the pump today? Show of hands. What would you think if there was a hybrid technology you could actually afford? Well, I'm about to tell you about one.
Keep going.
The whole
Yeah,
presentation.
yeah. No, I want just 30 to 60 seconds.
Oh, okay. Okay, well.
I'm about to tell you one, and that is energy dynamics. And
And
what we do is,
And that is that Energy Dynamics has developed a new type of hybrid technology based on hydraulics, not electronics. Hydraulics are far less expensive, more readily available technology, and do not require the high-price materials required for electric vehicles and electric hybrid vehicles. I guess I should have known how far I should have gone.
point B, we're going all the way to point B. You got this, you got the attention. Everybody wants to pay less for their fuel. And you told me that you're using hydraulics to create energy that is less expensive, and you told me a little bit about how you do it. You haven't asked for the order yet.
Okay. So, how would you like to participate in this opportunity to move forward with this new revolutionary hydraulic hybrid technology?
There you go. Okay, now let's, just a little coaching before you applaud. We're going to do it one more time. You asked a direct question,
Yes.
which only Scott Cook gets away with. So I would suggest you turn that into a rhetorical question, such as, if I were to ask everybody in this room if they're happy with what they pay for fuel, I'm sure nobody would say yes. I'm sure you'd like to pay less for your fuel. Well, there's a brand new technology based on hydraulics made by my company, NRG Dynamics, that extracts the same kind of efficiency at a lower cost. And we right now, what stage are you? A, B, C round?
B.
B round. Right now we're in a B round. But in order to move the technology further forward, we're inviting you to participate with Coastal Ventures and help move this technology forward.
You want to remember all that in one shot.
You'll do it. But you see, because you're how would you like to participate is sort of, well, no, I wouldn't like to participate. I don't think so. Yes, sir.
Well, he asked a different kind of question. He asked how many of you enjoy paying, $4
Well,
a gallon.
but
Obviously, nobody's going to raise their hand. So you don't have to be afraid that nobody's going to raise their hand, because that's exactly what you want in that case.
Well,
he asked a second question that required you to raise your hand. But the first question seemed valid. It seemed almost rhetorical.
it does seem almost rhetorical. I just caution you because just think, what's your name, sir? Steve.
You want to do this next, Steve?
Steve, no, you're absolutely right. It's seemingly a no-brainer, but just let's step back to the 35,000-foot view. When anybody comes up to the front of the room, the adrenaline hits. So you really want to be very well prepared and not turn the floor over, yield the control of your destiny to somebody who might put a strange look on their face by not responding in the way you anticipate, Steve. So I counsel that first sentence not to be a direct question, even though it's clearly a rhetorical question. So you say, if I were to ask how many of you how many of you are happy with the price of fuel, I'm sure nobody would say yes, and nobody can argue with that, but you get them thinking about the price of fuel. Okay, so try it again. One more, Jim.
I'm sure if I were to ask everyone if they like the price they pay for fuel, they would answer no. And I'm sure that everyone out there if they knew that there was a hybrid that could actually be affordable? The answer would be yes. I'm here to tell you about energy dynamics with its new innovative hydraulic-based hybrid technology that does not depend on the high cost and scarcely available materials used in many electric vehicles and electric hybrid vehicles. I'm asking that you help.
Wait a minute, now tell me, what does it depend upon?
What it does depend on is readily available materials with time-tested technologies that allow you a very safe, now I'm getting...
Oh, it's all right, it's your technology.
Okay.
So time-tested technologies.
Time-tested technologies that
converts familiar materials into...
That converts familiar materials into a high-performance hybrid vehicle.
And we're looking to develop this technology even further, and that's why we've come to ask you to participate and help us get there. What he said.
I almost said that. And we very much look forward to giving you the opportunity to work with us and Coastal Ventures and others to help us take this technology to market in a very profitable way.
Give him a hand. Now he's got it. Super duper, okay? Super. Okay, Xavier. By the way, just one little extra coaching tip. Notice that even though I coached Jim to say it differently, he said it differently a second time in not words that I gave him, but in his own words. Jim, in doing so, is tapping into the power of one of the most important skills and yet underutilized skills available to any presenter. It's called verbalization. Verbalization means saying the presentation several times aloud. It's a very, very, very powerful and yet underutilized tool. People say, I don't want to rehearse, I know my story. Well, guess what I did before I came here? I verbalized my presentation to you. I worked on your opening gambit, my opening gambit for you. Vinod, I've been practicing that for 2 days. Thank you. Okay, Xavier, your situation and audience.
So my situation is selling you my product. I want you to use my product.
But who is the audience?
So you, it's,
customers?
Yeah, it's customers. Yes, many customers.
Consumers? Consumers?
It's more people who want to create stories, and if you want to tell stories, I want you to use my product.
Stories?
So it's more general customers, I would say. Stories, yeah, storytellers. If you want to tell a story, I want you to use my product.
Are they marketing people, communication people? Are they writers?
They're writers, they are journalists, bloggers, people who have a story to share.
So is this a professional organization?
I would say like it's more, I don't know, I would say like more, I don't know, I'm not really, I would say like not homogeneous public necessarily, but so more like general storytellers, bloggers.
Okay, all right. Which of the 7 have you chosen?
A factoid.
A factoid, go.
Yeah. So today, whatever is happening, whether it's a wedding, something that happens in your neighborhood, or a revolution in Egypt, or earthquake in Japan, or a tornado, there are people on the street, on the ground, who are sharing what they witness with their mobile phone, and they share that on social networks. And it's important to tell the world what's happening. And in order to do that in an engaging way, it's important to be able to reuse, to tap into that content that people share. And that's the best way to tell stories that are engaging. And Storyfy is all about that. It's about enabling you as a journalist, as a blogger, to tell stories using what people have shared on social media, whether there are YouTube videos, Flickr images, tweets, Facebook statuses.
And Storyfy is a software tool that enables people to shape and structure their story? What?
So Storyfy is the tap water for this new social media age. So if you want to tell a story in any of those situations, you should use Storyfy to make the story and tell the world what's happening.
Okay, give him a hand. So notice his last sentence was, you should use Storyfy. That was his call to action. So your factoid, let's go backward here. Your factoid said, There are lots of events around the world, and people are sharing those events. Your USP is you have a software device that helps people structure their story. Is that what it is?
It's a website. Yeah,
It's a
platform.
website. You didn't say that.
Okay.
You have to tell me what you do. One of the important factors is that people go by telling me how they do it. Telling me what it doesn't do, Jim, didn't make sense until you tell me what it does do. So you need to tell me how the website gives people devices or forms or techniques or structures or software or pictures or what have you that enable people to marshal the elements of their story and tell a clear story. And I've come here today to tell you what that is so that I hope that you use them in whatever story you tell. Encore, s'il vous plaît.
So Storyfy is a website where in one place you can tap into the content that people shared on social networks and drag and drop it into your story so that you can create compelling and engaging stories.
And I hope at the end of my presentation you'll become a user and a subscriber to our website.
And I hope that at the end of my presentation you will become a user and use Storyfy to tell compelling stories.
Give them a hand. Thank you. Okay, the gentleman in the back, the corner a moment ago. Yes. Okay. Your name is?
Vikas.
Vikas.
With Echo First.
Okay.
I'm going
And-
to pitch investors for a future Series C round.
Okay.
And
Which of the 7 have you chosen?
Factoid.
Factoid, go.
The solar market, I don't know how aware you are, but it has grown 10x over the last 6 years. It has grown from a $3 to $4 billion market in 2004 to $40 billion market last year. The fact remains, however, that basic solar only covers about a third of a typical home's energy use, and it's still a little expensive. What we do at EcoFirst is we're able to capture the waste heat from below a traditional PV panel array and use it to do about 80% of a typical home's water, hot water, do about 30% of its space heating, do about 20 to 30% of its cooling, and do about 6 to 8 fresh air changes during a typical day. And we do all that by adding about 25-30% cost and doubling the net energy production is doubled from the same PV panel array. We're here to raise our Series C, which will the funds, we're doing a $10 million round, which will take us through the end of next year, at which point we'll be cash flow positive, and we hope for your participation.
Give him a hand. So, Vikas, you got my attention by the 10x improvement in the market. You told me about your photovoltaic cell and how that produces better results. We need a little bit more description on what the photovoltaic methodology you use that's different from Cylindra or Styon or what have you. How does it work? I mean, by the way, before we go on, your point B was loud and clear, correct? There's no question that faint heart never won fair lady. You're going to win the fair lady. So just a little bit more on what, tell me the name of your company again.
EcoFirst.
EcoFirst, how that photovoltaic, you don't have to do the whole thing again. Yeah. How does the EcoFirst photovoltaic cells work?
Yeah, I can do that part again.
Go ahead.
So the difficulty with the basic solar system is it is not quite as efficient, and so it only generates typically about a third of the energy required for a typical home. What the EcoFirst solution does, it captures the air, the hot air from beneath a PV panel, and converts it into usable thermal energy. The rest is
That's it. Give him a hand. There you go. Thank you. So there are the pieces that you have. Was there one more volunteer? Yes? No? Yes? No? Okay. One more? Come on. It's a very simple little formula. 1, 2, 3. Get the attention. Tell them what you do. Don't blow past what you do by saying we do it well, or we do wonderful things and it produces great results. We do things well and produces great results because it takes the heat and then returns it better than anybody else has done it before. Okay, Dane Morgan of Pelion, and your audience is?
I'm imagining at a sort of conference of experts in the battery area, say a Materials Research Society conference, something, a society conference.
A technical conference?
Yeah, technical
okay.
conference.
And which of the 7 have you chosen?
And I chose a factoid.
Go for it.
And the thing I'm looking for is, say, to get people excited to come work with us.
Recruitment.
Yeah.
We'll save that for the end.
Okay.
Save that for the end.
That's sort of my point B, though.
All right, that's good. That's good.
Okay. It is now possible to use computational tools to calculate basic properties of essentially every material that humankind has discovered in its entire history. And this can be done now in a period of just a few years. This has transformed what is possible in material science and development. We at Pelion Technologies are taking those tools and using them to develop new technologies in energy storage. In particular, we are developing magnesium-based batteries. Magnesium-based batteries are just like lithium batteries, but magnesium replaces the lithium, giving you dramatic improvements in energy density and capacity, and allowing you to use tools like your laptop for significantly longer. And we are hoping that you will come and join us and work with us on this new technology.
Bingo! Yes, sir. No coaching necessary. Give him a hand. Super duper. Thank you. He got it. You almost fell. You were very, very, very thorough by saying my point B is to get people to come work for us. Frequently, presenters make the mistake of stepping up to the front of the room, and after good morning or good afternoon or good evening, they say, I'm here to recruit some people for our company. You haven't earned the right to do that yet. But by saying, as he does, as Dane did, in the past few years, computational tools have changed the way technology is developed, and we at Pelion are developing a new form of magnesium battery that does it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and we're looking for a few good people to help come move this technology forward using our computational tools. So first, get the attention, then tell them what you're doing, and then ask for the order. Beware of asking for the order without having earned the right to do so. So that's the opening gambit, and that's the story. The story, however, is only the foundation of other elements of the presentation. There are a few others, and in the remaining moments for this afternoon, I'm going to give you the other key elements as they are with a problem, using the problem-solution approach, and a simple solution for each one of them. The next tier on the pyramid is graphics. And if you've been in business for a minute and a half, you surely know the problem of death by PowerPoint. Right? A lot of knowing smiles and nods going there. Well, the two most frequent violators of death by PowerPoint are bar charts and bullet charts, where more on the screen becomes less effective. People just unload the data on the screen. Well, we're going to take those two basic. They are the garden variety slides that people use in business, and you can't get away from them. These folks here who have been sketching and doing some wonderful things here are professional artists, and they're very talented. Business people don't achieve this level of expertise that this man and woman have been exhibiting here over the past 2 days, recording our presentations and the highlights of them. We all must work with the bar charts and the bullet charts. So in one very short section here, I'm going to show you a problematic bullet chart and the solution to the problematic bullet chart, a problematic bar chart and the solution to the problematic bar chart. And it'll be in one click. Here's how not to do a bullet chart. A lot of knowing smiles, and in one click we clean it out. And the differential is less is more. The problem with this is less is more. Let's go back. How not to do a bullet chart, how to do a bullet chart. And the delta between the two can be summarized in 4 bullets. Treat your bullets as headlines, not as sentences. A bullet does not need articles, conjunctions, and prepositions. to make it clear. The presenter, being the focus of the presentation, adds the value, creates the full sentences. Keep everything on one line. Try not to use word wrap. Word wrap causes the audience to search. If you can make all the bullets in any given slide start with the same part of speech, all nouns, all verbs, all modifiers. And finally, spread the bullets out evenly over the slide. Just 4 simple rules that convert. Let me go back. This to that, 4 simple rules. Now, how not to do a bar chart. Look familiar? Well, we can simplify it by doing that. But if I were to ask Jim to tell me what the yellow part of the bar signifies, Jim, what would you say? I'm sorry? You sure? So Jim did a lot of searching, didn't he, to find out that it's really product Y. So here's how we save your search. Simply by making those legends clearer, bigger, color-coded, and aligned with the bars. So now I'll turn to my friend Anne-Marie and ask Anne-Marie to tell me what the total of FY10 is, please. How much? About 130. Is that the kind of person, the way you count money? About 130? What's a few $1 million among friends? Oh yeah, hold up the pencil, Anne-Marie. Well, the point is you'll never know unless you do this. So the delta between how not to do it, the problem bar chart, and the right bar chart can be summarized in 4 more bullets. Leave the searching to Google. Make it easy for the audience to see. Put the numbers directly on the bars. Forget the y-axis. The y-axis is completely useless in projected images. Make the legend legible and color code the labels. A 3-minute tutorial on how to design the 2 most basic and most frequently used charts in business today. Bar charts and bullet charts. We now come to the greatest calling that Jim cited earlier in the day, the presenter who's uncomfortable in his or her delivery. This is a universal problem. The problem was quantified many, many, many years ago when the Times of London did a survey asking readers what they feared the most. And the results of that survey, or the top 10 items in that survey, are these. You'll notice that speaking before a group is higher than death. So what's the solution? Well, unfortunately, most people try to make the solution by becoming cheerleaders. They try to speak louder and flap their arms about and become performers in front of the stage. They try to emulate Steve Jobs. Well, guess what? I doubt that any man and woman sitting in this room was auditioned for his or her job. That any man or woman in this room got his or her job on the basis of an acting resume. You all attained where you are right now on the basis of who you are right now. The people who were schmoozing in the breakout, the people who were sitting at dinner enjoying the fireside chat with Mr. Gates and Mr. Blair, those were all chat situations. They were all conversational situations. So the role model for how to deal with presentation skills is the great communicator, Ronald Reagan. He was, by many accounts, an actor, but if you remember, his acting ability was not very well respected during his entire career in Hollywood. However, his true strength came before he was an actor, after he was an actor, and before he was a politician. For 8 years, between the end of his acting career and the beginning of his political career as the governor of California, he had a very unique job. He was the host of GE Theater. He was a spokesman for GE, but he was also the host of an anthology series of dramas. And in that role, he didn't act in but a couple of the episodes in the 8 years. His primary role was to do the openings and closing, the introductions and conclusions of his episodes that he hosted. Well, in Hollywood's usual efficiency, they put him in a bare studio with no scenery, just a few prop lights, and he had to project his personality into the inanimate lens of a camera and be welcome in the living rooms of America months later. And that's where he learned his technique of being conversational. And if I could just step back to my days as a producer at WCBS TV in New York, we didn't deal with performers in public affairs and news. We dealt with men and women from business, men and women from government, men and women from academia, men and women from science. They weren't performers either. What we did is bring them into the stressful situation of a studio and attempted to make them feel comfortable and look comfortable by being conversational. How did we do that? The staple of every public affairs program is the talk show. We'd put people around a table, around a chair, just like the fireside chat last night. Mr. Gates, Mr. Blair, Mr. Khosla, and the gentleman whose name I've forgotten, who is the host from Kissinger Associates, they were chatting. And they were warm and friendly and easygoing and loose. That's the role model you want for your delivery skills. Be a conversationalist. And the whole skill can be summed up in one simple overarching principle. Treat every presentation as a series of person-to-person conversations. A person-to-person conversation with Anne-Marie, a person-to-person conversation with Xavier, a person-to-person conversation with Jim, a person-to-person conversation with Fred. The next tier of the pyramid are the tools of the presentation trade. This wonderful setup by the team who are doing it today have done a magnificent job with lighting, moving people in and out with all kinds of scenery, and there are lots and lots of factors that go into it in the game of, in the interest of developing one solution for each of these tiers of the pyramid. I'm going to give you just one very, very important tip. And that is, in the relationship of the presenter to the screen, put the screen to your left. Why? Because audiences read from left to right. If the screen were, this is particularly important in text, because if the screen were to be on the right, the audience would go backwards across the words and pick them up the second time. If the screen is on the left, the audience gets it on the first pass. And we come now to the tip of the pyramid, Q&A. A well-done presentation can be ruined by poor Q&A. So how the presenter handles Q&A is very important, as you'll see in this video.
We have a question right here.
Yes, how has the national debt personally affected each of your lives? And if it hasn't, how can you honestly find a cure for the economic problems of the common people if you have no experience in what's ailing them?
Well, I think the national debt affects everybody. Obviously, it has a lot to do with interest rates. It has.
She's saying you personally.
Personal.
She said you. He said everybody. He wasn't listening. No, leave it up, please. He said everybody. He wasn't listening.
How has it affected you?
Has it affected you personally?
Well, I'm sure it has. I love my grandchildren. I want to think that.
How? Twice, and he still doesn't have it.
I want to think that they're going to be able to afford an education. I think that that's an important part of being a parent. Maybe I won't get it wrong.
3 times, and he still doesn't have it.
Suggesting that if somebody has means, that the national debt doesn't affect them?
What I'm saying,
I'm not sure I get it. Help me with the question and I'll try to answer it.
On the fourth pass, he finally admits he didn't get it, so he asks her to help him out, and she does.
that have been laid off from jobs.
Yeah.
I know people who cannot afford to pay the mortgage on their homes, their car payment. I have personal problems with national debt, but how has it affected you? And if you have no experience in it, how can you help us if you don't know what we're feeling?
I think she means more the recession, the economic problems today the country faces rather than the deficit.
You ought to be in the White House for a day and hear what I hear and see what I see and read the mail I read and touch the people that I touch from time to time. I was in the Lomax AME Church. It's a black church just outside of Washington, D.C. And I read in the bulletin about teenage pregnancies, about the difficulty that families are having to make ends meet. I talk to parents. I mean, you got to care. Everybody cares if people aren't doing well.
Never answer the question. And so he sent the message that he's not listening. Those three words can be very, very destructive in all human relationships, particularly interpersonal relationships. Is there a man or woman alive who either hasn't been accused or accused their significant other of not listening? Well, as powerful as it is in interpersonal relationships, it's even more powerful in group relationships. And this is precisely what happened to George H.W. Bush. These are the public opinion polls of the 1992 presidential campaign on the actual start of the campaign, which was the end of the Republican convention. The campaign is not thought to begin in earnest until after the second of the two conventions. The reason for that is that the Democrats have theirs, the Republicans have theirs, and it's always desirable to go first. So every 4 years the parties switch. In 1992, the Democrats went first in July. As a result of that, because of the media mindshare having gone first, Bill Clinton surged into a 17-point lead. This is what's known as the bounce for Clinton. Then the Republicans had their media mindshare for a week, and the next time they took a poll, Bush began to close the gap. This is what's known as the Bush bounce. Over the next several weeks, George H.W. Bush held steady. During the same period, Bill Clinton dropped precipitously. Why? One of the major reasons was that Ross Perot became a candidate. So in 2 months, Bill Clinton lost half his majority, half his lead. Then the debate happened, and then this happened. And the lines never came back until Election Day, and then Election Day happened. Yes, sir?
What would you have to say? The interesting thing is that
I'll come to that. Let me come back to, what's your name, sir? Andrew? Okay, just hang on to that. I'm coming to that very shortly, okay? Let's watch the results, however. The political analysts called that young woman's question the turning point of the campaign. The effect of her question was so profound that 8 years later, when George W. Bush, his son, appeared in the same town hall format where ordinary citizens got to ask questions directly of the candidates, they changed the rules, as you'll see in this next video.
The audience participants are bound by the following rule. They shall not ask follow-up questions or otherwise participate in the extended discussion, and the questioner's microphone will be turned off after he or she completes asking the question.
The rules worked so well that 4 years later, when George W. Bush debated John Kerry, they kept the same rules.
No one has seen the final list of questions but me, certainly not the candidates. No audience member knows if he or she will be called upon. Audience microphones will be turned off after a question is asked.
Those are the rules. That one question did it. It left George Bush with leaving the impression that he was out of touch. And the fatal mistake was he left himself open to the Democrats who came up with that slogan. And behind the curtain was this. He shot at a target he didn't understand. He answered a question he didn't understand and left the impression that he's out of touch. Now, you all saw him look at his wristwatch during the question. Well, it was worse than that, because we edited the video between this moment and his answer. We took out 1 minute and 10 seconds of video in the studio. The 1 minute and 10 seconds represented Ross Perot's answer to the same question. She asked the question of all three men. Perot answered first, Bush second, and Clinton third, as you'll see in this video.
May I answer?
Well, Mr.
Who do you want to
Yes,
start
of
with?
course.
Who?
Go right ahead. Go right
For
ahead.
each of you.
Yeah.
So
It caused me to disrupt my private life and my business to get involved in this activity. That's how much I care about it. And I owe it to the future generations, and on a very personal basis, I owe it to my children and grandchildren.
Meaning that George H.W. Bush had the entire length of Ross Perot's answer to calculate what the question was. Now it gets even worse. We actually also edited out the last 30 seconds of George H.W. Bush's answer because we were being merciful. He got deeper into the weeds. Then it got even worse. He headed back to his seat, and Bill Clinton's turn came up.
Tell me how it's affected you again. You know people who lost their jobs, lost their homes?
Well, yeah, And as soon as she says, well, yeah, the question, he then sends this message to the audience, and he ran with it.
Well, I've been governor of a small state for 12 years. I'll tell you how it's affected me. I've been out here for 13 months, meeting in meetings just like this ever since October, with people like you all over America. People that have lost their jobs, lost their livelihood, lost their health insurance. What I want you to understand is the national debt is not the only cause of that. It is because America has not invested in its people. It is because we have not grown. It is because we've had 12 years of trickle-down economics. We've gone from 1st to 12th in the world in wages. We've had 4 years where we produced no private sector jobs. Most people are working harder for less money than they were making 10 years ago.
I promise you on my Directors Guild card, we did not edit that shot. That was in the live air tape. That's not an edit. The director of the program during the live debate saw that and cut to that shot.
It is because we are in the grip of a failed economic theory. And this decision you're about to make better be about what kind of economic theory you want. Not just people saying, I want to go fix it, but what are we going to do? I think we have to do is invest in American jobs, American education, control American health care costs, and bring the American people together again.
The winner and the loser of the debate. So Bill Clinton sent the message, I heard you. And that's the message that every one of you, as a Khosla company, wants to send to every audience, whether it's recruits, investors, customers, partners, industry. And that takes a skill called active listening. So let's flash forward to Groupon's meeting on Menlo Park. Not Groupon, Group Me's meeting in Menlo Park. They finish a presentation, they put up their hand, and they say, any questions? And somebody in the back of the room asks a question, and this is what it sounds like to them. Being results-driven kind of guys, Steve and Jason might want to come up with an answer. George H.W. Bush, being a results-driven kind of guy, wanted to come up with an answer. Unfortunately, the answer he came up with was not the answer to her question. She did not ask about a little black church outside of Washington, D.C. She did not ask about teenage pregnancy. So the advice to every one of you, as it is to George H.W. Bush, is to slam on the brakes. And don't think of the answer. Don't use your processing power on the answer. Use your processing power on the issue. Unfortunately, the issue comes all wrapped up in a knotty ball. For the young woman, one of the strands of the ball was misinformation. She confused the national debt and the recession. And when the moderator tried to straighten them out, the moderator took her off on a tangent. The young woman also had emotion. I have friends who've lost their jobs and lost their homes. The young woman also had right-brain nonlinear thinking. And finally, the young woman had a huge jolt of adrenaline. Because when the runner from the National Election Commission came up and stuck the microphone in front of her, she said to herself, "Yikes, I'm on national TV." Well, the person in the back of the room in Menlo Park at a partners meeting is not on national TV, but you know what it's like when you're in a room full of your peers and you start to ask a question and everybody turns and watches you. You don't want to say, "Oh, that was a foolish question." So the adrenaline flows. So the job of every presenter who has to field the question is to unwrap the ball and find the key issue hidden within the ball. So now, Andrew, before we go on, tell me what the key issue, before I tell you what he might have said, was in his question. No, not his response. What was the key issue in the... Do we have a microphone? What was the key issue in the young woman's question? Wait, let's try Andrew.
I'm not sure.
Neither was he.
Well, I'm not sure because Clinton didn't answer her question either.
He did.
No.
I'll come to show you in a minute he did. So if somebody else want to take a shot...
She wanted to see empathy for people in her quote-unquote plight or pals' plight.
Close but no cigar. Somebody else want to take a shot?
In her question, she sort of inferred that unless you've gone through this, you don't understand.
Closer but still no cigar. Steve.
I think that's very close. I think she was saying, well, if you haven't been through this, how are you going to deal with it? How can you
Bingo.
from our point of view?
Bingo. He nailed it. It was a two-part question. You nailed it, Steve. And it was a convoluted question. It was a two-part question. It was a subordinate clause and a dominant clause. She said, how has the national debt affected you? And if it hasn't, how can you help us if you don't know what we're feeling? And the second time she asked it, she said, how has the national debt affected you? And if it hasn't, how can you find a cure for what ails us? So it was a convoluted question, but what she wanted was a do. And Bill Clinton said, what I think we need to do is find American jobs, fix American health care, improve American education, and bring the country together again. He had 4 do's in his answer. So, to answer your question now, Andrew, what might George H.W. Bush have said? Well, he could have used the technique that Bill Clinton used. And by the way, you saw Clinton come down off his stool and approach her. Well, in James Carville's autobiography, that was intentional. Carville said, every time you answer a question, approach the person and look at them. And Clinton actually repeated her words. He said, so you know people who've lost their jobs and lost their homes? And she said, well, yeah, Well, half the battle was won there, but only half. So what might George H. Bush have done? He might have approached her and said, so how can a person of means, which is what he said in his 4th try before he gave up, help people who are less than fortunate? That's called a paraphrase. And if she'd said, well, yeah, then he's already half the battle won. And all he had to do is say, you know, you're right. The national debt hasn't affected me, but that doesn't mean that I don't care. I care as much as the next person. And during my first administration, I initiated an X program, a Y program, and a Z program to help people who are less fortunate than I am. And if you'll only elect me to a second term, I'll initiate even more programs. So that's what he might have done. So the key problem in Q&A. We've given you problems in the story, the 5 cardinal sins, the 5 solutions, the graphics, more is less, less is more, delivery skills, adrenaline hitting you, don't be a performer, be a conversationalist, don't put the tool on the wrong side of the, don't put yourself on the wrong side of the screen, or otherwise the audience will feel odd. And the big problem in Q&A is not how to answer the question, is how to listen for what's in the question. And if you don't do that, no answer will suffice. No answer will suffice. You have to know what the question is. Did you have a question, Steve? Okay. So that's we've given you a little snippet of each of these problems and each of these solutions. They all combine to make the power presentation. They're in my books. One of them is called The Presenting to Win, The Art of Telling Your Story. The other is called The Power Presenter. And the third is called In the Line of Fire, How to Handle Tough Questions. You can get them all on our website. And I'm proud to tell you also that in 2 weeks, my new book is coming out, Presentations in Action. It's 80 case studies from the masters. You'll learn many of these skills you heard today. There's one about verbalization and one about practice and the importance of it. There's another on the Wi-Fi. The chapter 3 has all the Wi-Fis listed in them. They are going to be downloaded. It's still not ready for Kindle yet. They will be downloaded to your Kindles that you've been given. So thank you all for your time and attention, and we have 15 minutes for questions. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Jared, I thought this was great. I got a lot out of it. But one of the points that I didn't quite follow, when you had the sins up and the remedies for the sins, I was struggling with how too detailed is cured by an explanation. I thought you were going a different place with too detailed.
It's a simple little ground rule. If you assume that one person in the audience does not understand a buzzword of the most technical part of your presentation, pause on your forward progress and explain it.
Okay.
Okay?
All right. It's not about busy charts or
No. It's about using buzzwords. Vinod.
So, Jerry, I have a question on flow structure. I always ask people to write down the story they're going to tell in outline form before they start doing slides. But more importantly, within that, I ask them to cover 2 things. What are the messages you want to send? But more importantly, what are the questions people will have? So address both what you want to pitch them, but also the skepticism the audience will have about your questions. Because you left out a point, you skipped over something, there's a weakness. People tend not to want to lay out their weaknesses in a presentation, and I always tell them, if you don't address it, they'll address it on their own without asking you, so go ahead and tell them. Answer those questions for them. What's your view of that? Various people have taken various views on this idea of laying out what might be holes that they will ask themselves.
Actually, Vinod, we go even further back than that in the program. In the program, we have what's called a framework form. By the way, I invite you to the website. If you'd like to go to the website and read the blogs, we have blogs, and there are forms downloadable, and some of the blogs are... My blogs are not about how to bake a cherry pie or what I had for dinner last night. They're all lessons in presentation skills. As a matter of fact, the new book that you'll be getting is a collection of last year's blogs. But there's a download at the bottom of every page is a form called the framework form. And on the framework form, and I'll summarize this for you very succinctly if I can, on one side is what's called point B. What do you want? What's the objective? On the other side is the audience analysis, a deep analysis of what the audience is. And part of that is, what are their hot buttons? What are their fears, concerns, hot buttons? And what are you going to say to preempt those hot buttons in response to them? Now, the decision, so I'm in complete agreement with you, the decision of how to handle them, Vinod, is actually an option. It's an option play. You can put them in the presentation and attempt to be preemptive, or you can tell the presentation positively but be prepared to deal with them in the Q&A. And the decision as to which option play to take is kind of like a football game. Depends upon what the opponent is doing for you. But you're absolutely right. You've got to think about those fears, concerns, hot buttons of every audience member and be prepared to preempt them or counteract them, or just find the counterpoint to every point that's against you. Thank you. Next question. Yes, sir.
So oftentimes I invite people to ask questions anytime. Is that a bad idea? Should we set aside time for Q&A at the end of different sections of a presentation, or just wait till the end of the whole thing?
It depends on the context. It depends on the context of the situation. If you go into a small group meeting, the likelihood of you getting through the full presentation uninterrupted is zilch. It's going to be back and forth. It's going to be more of a conversation. As a matter of fact, a report from the road, for those of you who will ultimately or soon be going public, the world has changed in the public offering market. I get reports from the CEOs and the CFOs who've come back from their roadshows, and they tell me what's new. And I work with a gentleman with whom we worked about 10 years ago. He just did another roadshow, and he came back and he said, everything's changed since retailroadshow.com. Most investors have seen the Retail Roadshow canned pitch, and all they want to do is talk. So the questions come. One other very important point, and this is to my pals Vinod and Pierre. We know this for a long time. They've been big champions of mine, and for that I'm grateful to you, gentlemen. And people come to me and they say, you don't know these guys. They interrupt me all the time. We try to tell them their story, and they're so interruptive when we try to go to Sand Hill Road and tell them their story. To which I respond, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but on ourselves. The likelihood that they're interrupting you is that you're going too deep, too drill, too far down, and you're not connecting the dots. They will listen if you tell a clear story. If you capture the attention at the beginning, if you have a logical flow with an outline that proceeds, the likelihood of getting interrupted is slim. They are interrupting because you're not making sense. Next question. Yes, sir. Mr. Kwame.
Thanks. Great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
And this might be more of a statement. I'd just like to hear your reaction. One of the dangers I see with PowerPoint, and one of the reasons that I don't trust it, is yes, those small bullet points spaced out evenly, yeah, they look much better. But I do find that if people are forced to do that, they don't form their thoughts all the way. They kind of give the top line, and they haven't put together their actual thoughts backing that up. Unless they're a polished professional like you. I mean, if they're putting together a quick deck, they put together just the summary points, and they don't think it out enough. And I'd like to hear your reaction on that.
Well, that's like opening day in Candlestick Park without spring training. Or like opening on Broadway without previews. There's no substitute for developing the presentation from scratch with the framework form, tossing all the ideas out, the analysis of the audience, the analysis of what you want, all the ideas, get rid of it in the planning, do a brainstorming, pull out what you want, put it into a logical sequence, and verbalize. Verbalize, verbalize, verbalize. I urge you to verbalize. When you do that, then the bullet won't be a mystery to you, it'll be a trigger. A very simple role model. When people say to me, who should I follow for slides? I say, follow NBC or CNN. NBC has multi-million-dollar control rooms in Rockefeller Center. They have everything from chroma key at the high end to character generation at the low end. What do they put behind Brian Williams? What does CNN put behind Anderson Cooper? 2 words and a picture. And they speak from that bullet. Now, I grant you that Anderson Cooper and Brian Williams are reading from a teleprompter. But that's because the copy they're reading was written 3 minutes before air. There's not a man or woman in this room who doesn't eat, breathe, dream, drink, sleep your business. And there's no reason why you can't design a 4-word bullet that will prompt your discussion in full. Next question.
Real quick, agendas versus no agendas?
Option called. The agenda actually, had we had more time today, I would have taken you forward from the opening gambit into the agenda. But the agenda can be a boring laundry list. First I'd like to talk about, then I'd like to talk about, and then I'd like to talk, and then I'd like to talk about. But last not least, and then I'd like to talk about. And then it becomes a laundry list of words. If the agenda was to be used artfully, so let's go back to, I've forgotten your name, I'm sorry, with the recruitment. Dane? Okay. So if his presentation were to be, over the last few years, measurement of technological factors have changed dramatically. We at Pelion have utilized those tools to be able to turn out magnesium batteries that meet the requirements of the energy-saving industry in the country. And as we grow, we're looking for a few good men and women to help us grow. Opening gambit, USP, point B. To help you decide to join Pelion, hear that? I didn't say now let's look at the agenda. To help you decide to come along to Pelion, let's take a look, first of all, at our technology so that you can get as excited about it as I am. Some of the people who we work with, some of the customers, some of the partners, and some of the people on the team. And when you see all of this, I hope you'll see that Pelion, hear the difference? Now, I just gave you 4 bullets of the outline, didn't I, Vinod? You could see the technology, the team, the partners, the customers. But I didn't say first, second, third. So it's all an art, not a science. We have time for a few more questions. Vinod, you tell me how much time.
Oftentimes, many of us are not naturally good presenters.
I'm sorry.
Many of us are not naturally good presenters, or at least don't have a lot of practice. And what often ends up happening is we practice a lot, and then we go on stage. But then we come across perhaps slightly as not authentic, or slightly as not natural, because we've practiced so much. And so I was curious, how do you strike that balance between being very prepared, but at the same time coming across as being yourself, and not pretending to be something else?
There's 2 answers to that. One answer is to treat every presentation, as this gentleman has written here along the banner of his whiteboard, treat every presentation as a series of one-to-one conversations. We say that in our programs constantly. And saying that is easier said than done, but if you keep that mantra in mind, that you're speaking conversationally to Mr. Mathewson, to Andrew, to Steve, to Anne-Marie, just move around the room in a series of person-to-person conversations, you'll feel more natural because it's defaulting to a natural state. The other, and this is unfair to give it to you in the last 2 minutes here, it's a skill called customization. For those of you who are going on the road show, the challenge is, if you do wind up giving 80 iterations of the presentation, the danger is that it becomes canned. You go onto autopilot, correct? And your challenge in giving a road show is to make it the 80th as fresh as the first, and the first as well rehearsed as the 80th. Well, the way to do that is to use a series of customization techniques. And the first chapter in the book, called Presentations and Actions, that you'll be getting downloaded on your Kindle, is called A Lesson from Professor Marvel. Does anybody remember who Professor Marvel is? Professor Marvel was the Wizard of Oz in the first scene in The Wizard of Oz. When Dorothy's leaving her home and running away from home, Professor Marvel is a shyster, and he's a phony snake oil salesman. But he makes believe he's reading the future, and he has Dorothy close her eyes, and he rummages around her in her purse, and he finds things about her that he tells her about herself. Well, that's all very nice in the Wizard of Oz. But what you need to do in presentations is customize every presentation to every audience. Speak to them by name. Speak to them by mutual acquaintances. Speak to them by contemporary events. And if you think what I've done here today, I've talked about my friend Anne-Marie several times, and Chet several times, and Group Me several times, and Pierre and Vinod, my old pals. Today's New York Times. If the story of Group Me weren't in the Times today, I'd find another story. So there, and by the way, there's a little tip to help you do that. There's a website called www.newseum.org. If you go to it, you'll find a map of the United States, and on certain key cities, there's a dot. You click on the dot, and you'll pick up that city's home page. That city's hometown newspaper front page. So a very simple skill called customization. It's in the first chapter. It makes it more natural and fresh and alive. Okay, 2 more questions. It's 2 minutes to 6. Anne-Marie.
I have a question about preparation. Many of the big presentations we give may be the first and last time we give them. There's a first and last time for an A, a B, a C, a roadshow, et cetera. And barring the possibility of starting more companies, what is a set of best practices for preparing for these presentations? Focus groups, calling others. What are some of the strategies you've used?
For preparing the best presentation?
For getting ready for specific audiences. Every one of these presentations is a little bit different. All of the expectations are a little bit different.
If I may default to the IPO roadshow. On the IPO roadshow, the investment bankers provide a road manager at every stop at every city, and the road manager comes up with a portfolio on the people in every audience so that you know what their investment strategy is, you know what their holdings are. Don't keep it a secret. As best you can, become a PI. Go find out all you can about your audience. I couldn't have given this presentation if I weren't here all day yesterday and today. And it would be thin and canned. So that, back up, way back, do the audience analysis, do your framework, decide what point B is, who's the audience, do a brainstorming, pull out the key elements, structure them in a logical flow, and verbalize them, and verbalize them, and verbalize them, and verbalize them. One more, that's the last question. Yes, sir.
If we're out on a roadshow, I understand you have a very homogeneous audience, you have a message.
Yes.
If you get into maybe a little less structured situation where you have a fairly broad audience and it's more informational, I struggle a little bit from time to time. How do you make this meaningful and informative and interesting to a broad audience where your point isn't necessarily laser focused?
Right. It's a variation of the gentleman with the blue shirt who asked the first question about connecting the dots. What's your name, please? Jeff. Jeff asked the question of how do you explain? Well, if you take the answer I gave to Jeff and expand it ever so slightly, if you assume that not everyone in the audience does not understand what you're saying, just simply use this phrase. For those of you who might not be familiar with and then you bring those who are familiar say, wow, I'm hip, I'm cool. Those who are not say, wasn't Jeff really thoughtful for including me? So that's one way, is to make sure that everybody's hearing it. Also then, there's what's called the schmooze factor. If you can, walk out in the audience, in the breakouts, talk to the people, and then address, as part of your series of person-to-person conversations, address individuals in the audience. But involve as many people as you can. Can you involve everybody? No. You can't cast an immediately wide net. Thank you all for your time and attention. Good luck with your companies.